we are focusing on customer experience, digital transformation, right? But the one area where most of the businesses do not try to focus more, maybe it is their long-term strategy, or if it is enterprise, then it is definitely having the other set of challenges, right? So in the today's session, we are going to talk about uh, the cybersecurity in general, okay, and then the Mahendra would deep dive into what are the steps, what are the various aspects we have to look into it, right? So in today's session, we have invited Mahendra Kumar Patukuri. He has been the ex cybersecurity director from Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Happiest Minds earlier, and currently he is actually independent consultant in the cybersecurity domain. And if in case I'm not wrong, Mahendra, you have more than 20 years of experience in the cybersecurity.
Yeah, close to 17, 18 years now.
So welcome once again. So Mahendra, can you just throw a light? What is it you think that this trend for cybersecurity is going, and why actually companies need to focus in this area?
Sure. If you look at today's trend and the market requirements, right, and the companies that are very much keen to look at is how do I, mitigate or downgrade my cyber risk, right? From a threats perspective, from a insider, thefts perspective, and external attacks perspective, correct? So in that view, there has been a significant, high numbers in terms of how people are perceiving cyber, right? In terms of either they see whether I have huge number of assets that are growing in my company, and should I have, what is the scale or the balance that I should protect in terms of those assets, right? Obviously, there's a huge number of people that are, transactional. There are employees, contractors, vendors who access your network both internally or through externally, right? So it's very imperative and very important to say that what is the risk that it brings along with these accesses, and how do we mitigate it, right? And obviously, the cybersecurity has to be enhancer for the business. At the same time, it has to be, how do we trust each other, right? How do we bring in that trust factors? And that's the reason we put a lot of controls, to ensure that there's a check and balances between what's being accessed, who is accessing it, why they're accessing it. If at all they're doing certain activity, are we monitoring it the right way, right? And are we building the effective use cases, right, for identifying any loss of data, any loss of critical information within organization to external factors, right? So it's very, very important at this time of frame where we all are working from home. There is a lot of risks that come with it, right? And cybersecurity has not been more important at this time, and especially during this pandemic, where a lot of devices have been given to users, right? And they're accessing the network. They've been using some personal laptops to access corporate network. So it is very important to understand how the identity management is done, what privacy controls have been taken by the companies, and then what data protection, effective controls at the same time monitoring has been done, right? And can it be enforced in terms of if we do any policy violations, right? So it's very important that we all know as employees that or every company's employees know that there is certain policies by the organization, but are they being compliant with it?
So do you think that cybersecurity is should also be the concern for the mid-scale or the small-scale companies?
Yeah,
can
from
they execute
SMB
this?
Yeah, so it is from an SMB perspective. It is it depends on the business that they do, right? And dealings that they have. There are a lot of small companies which are dealing with a lot of active banking system, correct? From transactions to certain applications that they host, right? It's very, very important that they consider some of the key aspects of cyber, at least from a perimeter perspective, then how they're compliant to certain policies and identity and access controls perspective, and what kind of authentication systems that they have, right? And because a lot of these companies would use a lot of cloud service enabled systems, right? And a lot of these security controls become the by default by the provided by the cloud providers, but it's also imperative that some of the small companies kind of look into internally, can we have an effective perimeter security done in terms of how it should be defined as per the project or the for their respective projects, right? Because they deal with so many customers. But in a larger scale, it's very important that they have certain detection systems in place, or someone doing it for them, right? At least if you don't even do a detection or monitoring, then it's very tough to even know what's happening, correct? When I say just by monitoring, they have to look at the existing systems, existing users monitoring, right? And kind of bring a trend to understand what's happening in the last 6 months or 3 months, right? To just understand from usage perspective of employees, traffic data, what they've accessed, and is it the right legitimate traffic? I think these are the small steps that the SMB sector can take. At the same time, then bring in
even I
certain
think at the level of, I think, CRM websites, basic protection like e-commerce that you're saying, those things can be done, right?
Yeah. So the other step which they ideally can look at is having the existing technologies enabled or enhancing them, right? So they would have invested in certain technologies, right? Let's say from network or from application or database, or even from detecting certain data loss prevention tools. So how do you enhance them or upgrade them, right? And then key is how do you test their applications from a security perspective? Are they all patched for the latest vulnerabilities, right? Are there any exploitables that they can look at getting their application tested, mobile applications tested, right? Network infrastructure tested, and so on. So these are 3 major steps they should look at.
So many people actually also confuse the cybersecurity with the compliances. Are they just a part of it, or like can you call the technology compliance or any company, as part of the security, they do have certain kind of compliances, right? So how, to what extent compliances and security is the same, or like just together? Can you just throw a little light? What is?
Yeah, it's a very good question, I think, and it's very, very important question. In terms of, a lot of companies say, hey, I'm compliant to ISO standard, right? So ISO would talk about certain controls, but it talks about this is the way it should be done, but it necessarily does not tell how it should be done or what kind of technology should be done, right? It's up to the companies to use or follow those, bring in those particular controls and accesses controls and technological controls as per their choice. But it both go in hand. Let's say if you're not being compliant to certain things, then you have to be in putting those controls for that standard. Let's say for PCI perspective. So someone dealing with, let's say a Paytm kind of a company, right? I mean, I know it's a large company, but what I'm saying is anyone dealing with Paytm should be compliant to certain regulations, right? May they not be directly affected by that, but at some point, they should be knowing, whether they have putting the encryption in the right way, right? Whether they are being, so all those associated controls are in conjunction with the compliance standard. So both go hand in hand. So it is not obviously necessary that you have to be sticking to only the compliance standard, what it says. You can go beyond the compliance standard and put effective controls, because of your business risk can come into place, right? Or your customer data has been compromised. right? Come for example, or your application is very critical for your business to be available 247 for your customers, right? You
Mm,
cannot afford to get the application down because you would lose dollars on it, right? So how do you put more controls in conjunction with the compliance standard, or more than that, right? So
mm,
that there is a service availability and your business runs without no disruption,
mm,
right? So you got to have a plan which says this is my critical important service or assets, and how do I protect it, right? And obviously I use a standard to do that. So but can I go beyond it and make a priority in terms of that, this is number one for me, number two, and I would try to improve later on in the course of time uh, for the other controls to bring in, right? Because
mm,
it also depends on where your business are going, and where your end customers are taking you, right? And what are the new markets you want to target. So all those things, so the what I'm trying to say is you got to keep cybersecurity in mind, right?
mm,
Every time your business grows, every time your business horizontally or vertically expands, right? So you got to keep what are my risks that can come up, right? So if you think in that way and approach it in that side, I
mm,
think you would have a longer prospective business, right? So that it's not a reactive later on. So something gets bad happens, and then you're reactive in your cybersecurity. But if you
mm,
are more proactive, then I think you are there for a long term in terms of getting your assets protected and getting available for the users of your business. Right?
mm,
Because at the end of the day, it's going to be you got to have your key business requirements available for your customers or for your usage. Right?
mm. So correct
So
me if in case I'm not wrong. Compliance is all about what is already known and set as a standard, right? Whereas from the security point of view, security anyway keeps changing very fast. I mean, there is always a new security threats, right? So when we say compliance and security, cyber security, which is actually a real time and it's continuously evolving, is this what is the actual difference between compliance and the cyber security?
Yeah, so compliance standards are there, and they are upgraded very in a long term, right? It's not
Yeah, correct. It doesn't
every month.
evolve very fast, right? I mean,
Yeah, correct, very true. And there is the technological components evolve very fast, as I
mm,
said. So you are compliant to certain things, which is, let's say you have let's take an example of you already have a home built, right? But do you want to give an wooden door or a steel door? It's up to you, right?
mm,
So but the compliance standards say, hey, you got to have a door, right? So people would have that in mind, but it's as I mentioned, if you keep your business risk in mind, and then you got to say, okay, these are my critical apps or databases which are absolutely necessary for me to even run the business, right?
yeah.
And I cannot afford to lose this, right? So how am I protecting it? And you got to look at 360 degree of way of protecting it, not
And
just
that
from a
and that's
technological control.
and that's basically has to be real time. I mean, like,
Yeah. So
okay.
if you say 360, not just from a technology, but even from a people awareness perspective. So let's say we both are working, and we are the administrators of this application, and someone sends a phishing email, right? And we say respond to that, and it's gone. Uh, so you got to be awareness of the people, and you got to have certain processes in place. Obviously, the compliance standard will enable you or help
Mm,
you in that way, but you can obviously get an advancement then, and very importantly to do an assessment, right? If you periodically do an assessment of your overall cybersecurity posture, right, you will come to know what are your loopholes, how you fix them, what can be a road plan, right? And then
okay.
plan your investments accordingly going forward, right? It's very important on that way.
Okay. So, just for our audience, right? According to you, what are the various uh, kinds of cybersecurity threats that you believe which is which needs very important consideration? The top 3 or top 4, if you can.
Yeah, the first one I would say, from a cybersecurity, what you should really consider is to first have an understanding of what should key assets that I should protect, right, and
Okay.
classify them, because I've seen that a lot of organizations don't classify, and having a challenge in classifying it, right, and have that classification done, at least from an SMB segment, right. And it depends on whom you're talking to sometimes in the organizations. Like if you're talking to the board members, they would say, okay, let's have the risk minimized from a cyber perspective. But if you're talking to someone who's execution level, an architect, they would say, okay, we're doing penetration testing, we have access controls in place, so we're all good, right? But it depends on, you're not just an alone one company you're interacting, and it's an ecosystem that you're interacting with, right? So you've got to understand how the ecosystem is working, and then say, do I have enough intelligence from cyber to protect myself, right? And how do I put those controls in place, right? In terms of assets classified, am I doing sufficient testing and assessments from those assets to understand if there are no loopholes, and at the same time having a strong perimeter security side, right, where it would seal my infrastructure from threats and vulnerabilities, right?
Okay.
So, and then look at how you're making the cyber awareness among the people, because it's everyone's responsibility.
Correct.
To make a secure cyber, from attacks and things like that, and also bring in certain accountability within pretty perspective, accountable, and bring in those where it says, okay, is it someone is accountable, someone is responsible for these activities, so that it becomes easily like a toolkit approach, right? Something happens, we can put a lot of tools in place, and then say, hey, where it went wrong, and we can exactly fix that particular patch, right? So that is becoming very important, because today a lot of things are virtual. Everybody's working from home. They're accessing cloud systems, shared drives. So it's very important that we got to look
First
at all these sides of angles. Yeah, classify, and then protect, do an assessment, and very importantly, kind of have a monitoring system in place, right? If not a very large one, at least have some basic ones.
So, to those of you who have just joined, I once again want to welcome, and if you have any questions, right, please post in the chat. I would really love to actually ask the same question from Mahendra. So, Mahendra, we were talking about classification, right? But what happens many times, even the problem itself is not even known. So we don't even sometimes able to define, right, what kind of category the cyber attacks are. For example, if you'll ask many people, right, they are still confused between what is virus, what is malware, what is phishing, right? So that's why, can you just throw lights on various types of cyber security, like what is actually the virus, what is malware, what is phishing, or similar kind of very popular terms, so that people understand that these are the basic things, right? What you should call malware, virus, phishing, what?
Okay. Sure. So basically, if you look at from a cyber perspective, there are three angles. I would say, if you put a triangle, right, in the first, on the top corner, you can say users, right, and the left hand corner you can say assets, and the right hand corner you can say traffic. So I call it as this triangle as the very critical from a, I'm talking from a very high level now. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
drill down later on, right? So if you look at users, right, on the top, someone is all your users, right? It can be employees, contractors, your vendors, right? Your business partners, guests, visitors, right? All these people who are coming to your network, accessing certain data. Now, what are they doing is that basically accessing certain assets on your
Mm-hmm.
left-hand side, right? So it can be your laptop or you're accessing your email exchange, right? They're checking their emails. They're going to certain websites. They're going and doing some changes on your application or databases. So all these are put under assets. Now, what I was talking about classification is that assets. How do you classify and tag them, and then say who should access what
Mm-hmm.
within the users, right? So, and the right-hand side is something, all these things happening, generating a traffic, right?
Mm-hmm.
A huge amount of bandwidth has been consumed, right? So these are the things that goes on in any organization, right? Either a big or a small or a medium scale. But if you have effective controls all across at various levels, it
Mm-hmm.
helps a lot. Now, when you talk about any malware, right? A malware is nothing but any malicious traffic, right? Let's
Malicious
say,
traffic. Oh, okay.
yeah. So let's say, I come in and I'm supposed to log in, let's say one time or two times. I should be able to log into my company domain, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I cannot forget my password. But what if I'm doing, maybe 50 or 40 failed attempts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I need to look at because it's something malicious happening, right? May not be it's a malware, right? But the intent is to create certain malicious, maybe, right? But anything that is, let's say, for example, what is a virus, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a piece of software or which kind of replicates itself, right? And causes damage to your system, your services, right, which are not available for others to use, right?
Okay.
Um, and very importantly, there are a lot of viruses which would not do any execution at all, right? They would just keep it, just be there for some time, and at the right time they would start executing it, right?
Okay.
But the Trojans, what we call as Trojans, right, is something very harmful also. Is that it's a similar, like they would replicate, but they would open a backdoor to someone externally, right? Let's say I'm accessing here and I'm opening a communication channel to my backdoor, and I would transfer all this data to that
Mm-hmm.
person or that particular network.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, very important to understand, how Trojans work and how viruses work. Because today a lot of people think that we put a antivirus and they would get, a lot of things would take care.
Okay.
But antivirus, yes, it takes care of certain things, but it's all signature based, right? It has to keep updating itself. Um, but anything malicious, I would say, not only from technology perspective, but if you look at you're discussing certain confidential data during in your outside your office, which is again malicious, right? I would still call it as malicious because that can be used by someone
Mm-hmm.
else, right, in a wrong way, correct? Uh, so you may intent or unintentionally doing malicious activities, correct?
Okay.
uh, those educational needs has to come within the organization, and how the company kind of puts this across to their employees is very important, because I've seen a lot of small scale businesses where they kind of don't uh, give much importance from an education perspective of the for the users, right? They think if I just put a strong firewall on the top, it will
Mm.
take care of a lot of things, but right. Uh, but where we have seen that a lot of this doesn't help. It helps to a certain extent, but that's a very short sighted, right? Again, as I said, if you look at your priorities and if you can kind of classify it and then look at where should I invest for the next 1 year, right, or 2 years will help a lot in terms of defining your overall cyber plan in conjunction with your compliance standard.
Mhm. Okay.
Right.
So what you're saying is definitely that then malware, phishing, trojans, virus, these are all different terms, and everything has its own purpose. So can you just let me know then in that case, let's say when you're saying that having a 1 year plan or long-term plan, so can a single guy, let's say if you're working in a mid-sized company, right, can do certain benefit to the company if that person is hired as a cybersecurity professional?
Uh, yeah, it can. They can have certain changes, right? They can bring certain value in terms of uh, how they should be look at this current cyber
Mm-hmm.
challenges. But again, uh, it actually very much depends on what business you are in,
Mm-hmm.
whom you're talking to on a day-to-day basis, right? From a
Mm-hmm.
uh, interaction perspective, because if you're talking to a lot of banking and the insurance sector, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're doing a lot of things on the online, right, you got to be very, very careful what you're doing on the online, because it's very, very easy to uh, kind of understand what you're doing from a online traffic perspective and then try to copy that data somewhere else, right? And it's very easy to steal or theft that particular information.
Okay.
Um, so it's very imperative that if they can get someone who has a background of cyber, who can guide them for a certain period, and
Mm-hmm.
if they can hire that person, for from a, looking at long term or managing certain security technologies, it helps, right? But
Okay.
I think it's very important. It starts where you are currently, right? Are you in ground zero, or do you want to understand what's your posture, right? Because what happens is something wrong happens, and then there is an assessment done, right? What happened? But if you're doing little proactively, hey, are we covered in all aspects? Get someone some expertise, advice that are we covered or good to go. That helps a lot to plan your you know hiring or from an investments going forward.
Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
if in case I have to ask you, right, since enterprises has the money, right, they have the money, but then what do you think according to you they face a kind of challenges in terms of adopting a cybersecurity, a good cybersecurity strategy? What are the challenges basically in the cybersecurity domain?
Yeah,
Industry
large companies.
challenges. Yeah.
Yeah, so large companies have large money and they do invest in, and they have the capacity to invest. But some of the key challenges that um, last companies that if you look at, the larger the organization, the larger the challenges also, is because one is multiple times what happens is uh, everybody knows, but it's this from a policy or education perspective. But the large challenge is insider information leak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where someone from within the organization kind of leaks the information, or the data is compromised from that person's asset, right? Either a laptop or a mobile device, etc. Um,
Okay.
and and as the industry grows, there are a lot of devices, new type of devices that are coming in, right? And adoption, like for example, if someone is going to cloud, so that it brings in their own challenges for the cloud security areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if someone is using IoT devices,
Okay.
right, what kind of security are we putting in place for IoT adoption, right?
Mm.
Even before we roll out those particular IoT devices. So different industry way they do have a challenge. If you look at insurance sector, for example,
Mm-hmm.
you know there's a huge need to ensure that the data is absolutely protected. Data authentication has been done in the right way, right? Privacy controls are in place. But the large challenges is that how do I restrict or kind of control insider theft, right? Because it's very difficult to catch the insider threat until you have a very robust, privileged monitoring in place.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, large, collection of data where you try to collect and do a
Mm-hmm.
live monitoring. At the same time, you do in the backend historical analysis and analytics on your user assets and traffic data, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understand a pattern that's been happening. And very important that you also get the latest threat intelligence information getting into your organization's tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they kind of proactively understand. And it's very important that different terms used by the industry, like for example, zero trust security, right? So I don't trust anybody, but I do have like a toll gate approach where I say, hey, I give you access to certain things, and you're supposed to use so many miles, and after that you cannot use the road anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So and you authenticate and you ensure and show me and validate that what you have done in the last mile is absolutely in compliance to my policy, then I would allow you to use for the next road, right? So there
Okay.
are. So how do we implement this effectively? Is a large challenge. Yeah.
So I remember, right, when I was in working in Motorola, right, even Motorola had mm, for its own content, right? They had a system called DRM. So uh,
Mhm.
what do you call DRM? Direct Rights Management, Digital Rights Management. Sorry. So for that, we had a conditional access system. So even within the conditional access system, we used to see
Yeah.
that we had various levels. So even within the organizations, people, not everyone working in the conditional access system, they had the entire access of the kind of document or model that is there. So according to you, right, when I have to map the similar kind of thing for the company, those who are executing a strategy for uh, cyber security, how do you think the such kind of, whether these things are also implemented in the organization level? What kind of challenges from the team's point of view within an organization, if you are working for a cyber security project, needs to be leveled or a hierarchy?
Okay. So let's say if you're working for in teams, and obviously there are multiple projects and programs that are carried on.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm
and
just
there
rephrasing
are
your word because you're saying, right, I can't trust anybody. So it includes even within employees also, right? Within companies, employees also.
yeah, correct, correct. So it has to be mutually understood that and in great spirit, everybody has to understand that what the project they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, is secure, right? And all the hard work and the time that they spend in executing that project or getting the result of that is not there for sale in dark web, right? It's something like someone makes a movie and it gets released in piracy, right? So all the hard work is gone. So in a similar way, you're executing a project, so everybody is working that project has to be very cautious and cognizant of the fact that they all are keeping it secure and not discussing it outside or to competitors as well. It depends on the level of projects that you're doing, right? If you're involved in large programming confidential data, or developing a product, or releasing a feature, uh, it's very important that how are you accessing it, right? Or let's say, I've seen in my experience that where they say, hey, the company says you're supposed to put it on OneDrive with encrypted, right? And that's this standard of encryption. But the guy is, for some reason, putting that in his local drive, not in the OneDrive.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big difference, and it's stored in local drive and unencrypted, right? And it's a big risk, right? If at all something bad happens. Maybe he did not have the connectivity to put it in OneDrive at that time. Multiple challenges, but how do you overcome that and be compliant to the policy, right? Because uh, it's very important from the top. Also, it's driven that hey, you got to be uh, in no compromise level for doing an action which you're not supposed to do, right?
Okay.
So that has to be driven from the top. And what I'm also saying is that the people who are working at various levels, from the bottom to mid level, everyone should understand that it's very important, and what they're doing from a project perspective, and how it can be taken easily by someone else, right?
Okay.
So if they work in that mindset, I think it's easy to manage the cyber posture for the organization and the project.
Okay. So I have just now unmuted a couple of participants, and Satyapal, another person who has joined through the mobile phone. If you have any question, right, you can directly ask, and Mahendra would be able to hear your voice. Satyapal, do you have any question by now so far?
No, I'm okay. I just joined in now, so I just.
Okay. Okay. So Mahendra, then in that case, right, I just wanted to know, and I have another question, because according to you, what are the various emerging cybersecurity solutions and services which are available based on whatever factors, right, that we have to emerge? So what are the emerging cybersecurity solution features you see that based on certain categories or characteristics?
Sure. I think today, if you look at, it's a very broad question because there are so many things happening within cyberspace.
Yeah, I agree. Just highlight. Just highlight. Top 3 or top 4. Just highlight in just 3 kind of bullet points, and maybe people can, so that people can think from those lines. Actually, at least.
Yeah. So from a technology perspective, security analytics is very key. Because people are getting into how do we do the security analytics part. You've got to understand mapping of historical and the present data. The second one is, how do I implement anything that like as I said, zero trust security, right? How do I build that model, or re-architect my whole thing based on this model, right? Because of the various factors that are coming in today, and the changing dynamics of the work location and the way data is being accessed and processed, right? So because I cannot trust anybody today, right? Because I'm not able to see them, or they're not coming to my company to work every day, right? So this becomes a very important aspect. And third aspect is, it's been there for a while, but how do I ensure that my data, which is hosted on a public cloud, right, is absolutely foolproof from the bad guys, right? For example.
Okay.
So the cloud security has been very important to address going forward.
Okay. So according to you, how vulnerable the databases are, especially which are put on the AWS? Because although they say that anything which is present in AWS is highly secure, based on your experience, what we should think, like, is our data really secure if it is on AWS?
Yeah, let's. AWS is one of the cloud providers. It will be wrong to say that is it secure on AWS and not. Is it not secure on Google Cloud, or is it more secure on Azure? But in the bottom line is, all the 3 or any of the cloud providers have 3 major the way it works, right? One is the cloud providers, which is we call as CPs, CSP's responsibilities, and the other one is the customer's responsibility, that is your responsibility, and the third one is joint responsibility, right?
Okay.
So let's say if you take from an ISAS perspective, so they're just giving you the platform or the infrastructure, but what you're hosting it is absolutely your responsibility. So AWS will never say that it's my responsibility. It's up to you to put what controls you want, go to a marketplace, or uh, do any of your own technology that you can host it there, and they're absolutely free to put there. So people, there's a confusion that that if I just put there, everything is secured, right? But I would suggest please read the contractual documents, what you sign with the CSPs, right? Because there is their responsibility and some of them is your responsibility. And in the middle, it is joint responsibility, right? So we got to understand that aspect of it. And then once you, I think, get hold of that, then you would be in a better position to understand, what intervention that I should do to protect my data, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So when you say, right, there are a lot of things needs to be done, right? And I even I have done a lot of research, and I see that a lot of security solutions are available in the market, which are, some of them are focused for the enterprises, some of them are focused for small businesses, and what you're saying is, as there's nothing called a full fit solution. So if in case I have to ask you, right, the solutions which are available as managed security or security as a service, to what extent do you think that these are a viable option for the companies to choose?
Yeah. So I think I mean, it depends on the maturity level. I mean, there are a lot of options that you can say that where you want to start with, right? So you want to just start with basic things where you want to say, hey, I just want to do understand my applications to whether they're secure or no, and that's it, right? And then I will take care post that. But if you say that, hey, I want to know, I'm into a business where I'm dealing continuous transaction using internet, or I hosting a lot of data in the public, but should I need some basic monitoring in place, or should I keep doing validation every month, or do an assessments to see where I stand? You can adopt that as well, right? But I think you've got to have a practice in terms of how you are looking at your cyber posture, whether it is adopting a third-party managed service provider, or you're deploying a technology and putting in place, right? But what validation have you done? Which vendor to choose from, right? Let's say you're choosing this particular product, and after that, after a few years or a couple of years, the vendor is disappeared, right? I mean, in terms of there's no product lifecycle management, or they're scrambling that product. So it has to be very much in line with how that product can help you to grow, because then you would be doing replacement of technologies and burning on your capex cost, right? So yeah.
So how do you see then in that case, since a lot of startups are coming up and the new technologies like decentralization of the databases and the blockchains? So how do you see this space? Because see, I also consult the startups in the as a blockchain solution architect, right? And a lot of things goes at the principle of same, the data transparency, which cannot be altered, or even if it is altered, right, we have actually a sequence of updates which is based on decentralized decision, right? So what do you say, what do you have to say if in case you have to incorporate blockchain as a technology in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, blockchain brings very very different challenge, right? When you say I have been using blockchain, and then say, okay, how do I kind of secure it? But if you look at the way people have been using the typical controls of security is pretty much the same, right? There's no major changes, right? But how do I bring in data obfuscation, or a high degree of encryption in terms of understanding that particular you know, data transfer and usage of the data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one aspect is looking at this angle from a data, how it's been used and how it's been accessed, right? And then what authentication systems do I have in place
Mm-hmm.
from this perspective for the, how the blockchain is working, because end of the day it's tunnel to tunnel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then um, there is a there is a lot of study going on in terms of how we can protect end to end in the blockchain, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is evolving, it's fast evolving, right? And there's no bulletproof solution, right? Or saying that if I just put this place everything is secure, right? So it's a
Mm-hmm.
combination of what current tool sets you have. Are they able to handle the latest threats? Are they equipped with enough intelligence to understand, what might come up proactively?
Mm-hmm.
And is your organization have enough processes in place to kind of uh, do an action if at all something happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a proactive manner. So are you ready in terms of that step, right? Do you have readiness? Means do you have enough workflows in place? Do you have the team readiness and their understanding what to do in those conditions? So all those readiness has to be there, right? So that's why a lot of teams or the organizations kind of do a lot of red team activities, right? Where they just kind of just go blindly and then say, let's do this activity and then understand what readiness do we have, or
Mm-hmm.
test our ability to understand these problems in the first place, right?
Okay.
And that's why it's very important from small scale businesses that they do have some level of expertise, advisory, or understanding from cybersecurity professionals that where they stand today, can they, where do their business is going forward, what is important for them and what priority they need to take
Mm-hmm.
uh, in context with uh, their what business they are, and then say if am I safe or secure, and what should I do in order to be or to achieve some degree of safety and protecting my data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even what level I stand, right? So that kind of expertise advisory is required even for small and mediums or startups,
Mm-hmm.
because all the startups would have certain applications hosted or developing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important to get that expert advice and then take steps forward or kind of roll it out and implement it going forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So for others, right, those who have joined a little late, right, we started with our conversation on cybersecurity where we asked Mahendra about what are its benefits, and uh, and then we covered where we talked about various kinds of cybersecurity threats, where Mahendra actually gave us a little explanation about what are uh, trojans, malware, viruses, and very important point which Mahendra actually spoke about when I had asked the question whether the small company can also invest in the cybersecurity, and his answer was it all depends upon what we basically want to secure, and it all boils down to the current maturity level of the organization and also clear understanding of how their current processes in place and what they can invest on, right? So although I had my last question right around what should be the enterprise approach, but I think so far in the communication itself, Mahendra made it very clear that any organization, whether it's a small or bigger, what is more important is to understand what kind of security issues that we are going to pinpoint, right? So in those discussions, Mahendra actually spoke about what is actually the compliances and what is actually the cybersecurity in general. So there is a vast difference between compliance, which is actually certain standards that you need to follow and that gets updated little very late, whereas cybersecurity is more of a kind of real-time approach where companies has to prepare themselves on a regular basis, right? and they have to also build the capability. So Mahendra, one last question, because since you mentioned, right, everybody has to first focus on the strategy part. They have to also internally gauge their maturity level of the organization, whether it's small or bigger, and from the budget point of view, and then what is the long-term plan, and also the clear understanding of what kind of securities that we are trying to focus on, right? But the question is, even let's say if a small company or a bigger company, right, if they want to start with the cybersecurity, what kind of team members they should hire, what they should look, what they should look in a particular profile. Let's say I'm hiring someone as a first hire who will be senior guy, right? Not very senior guy, but someone who is a mid-experienced professional, 6-7 years, and maybe he will be the first guy coming into the organization, and he will be responsible for definitely down the line building a team, right? So if a company has never thought through, although they have always used on traditional softwares, right, uh, traditional software they have used for the investment as a security, but let's say if they have to focus on a dedicated cybersecurity, right? So what should be the skill set? And then again, if the same person has to hire someone fresher or the new team members, right? What kind of skill sets a company should look at uh, into candidate?
Yeah, yeah. So, a very valid question, very, very important question in today's market.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of,
everybody is doing certification and then coming saying that, cybersecurity professional.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, just to tell you, at least in my experience, cybersecurity is, very vast area,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of, people, have different opinions in terms of, cyber technologies, right? But I typically look at, any security tool or predominantly anything that you're dealing with, especially cyber. You got to understand that there is an architecture component for the tool,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then there is a configuration or setup, step that comes out. And then the third step would be to develop and tune that particular tool, right, from a content perspective, which is in context with your environment.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth would be to kind of roll it out, right, to within the entire organization. Now, very importantly, a lot of people have certifications done in various tools, right? And they would have huge knowledge in terms of that particular tool.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that at a broad level, you got to look at just from overall technological perspective, because that technology doesn't change, whereas the vendors would change over the period of time. Let's say if I take a firewall, there can be multiple vendors, but if someone has a deep understanding of that firewall,
Mm-hmm.
right, he can work in any of the technologies, right, or any of the vendors firewalls, right? If someone is working on Cisco, he can work on Palo Alto, for example. But uh, I would suggest that if someone is looking at basic level, like there is nobody within the organization, but there would be a decision said that, hey, let's hire a compliance guy, right? Someone who knows strong compliance, and then he can define and build a team later on.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel that the level of experience that you should hire, it depends really on what is, how, basically what is your uh, appetite of risk that you're dealing with, and what kind of goals that you want to have going forward. Like say, do you need a 10 years experience guy to kind of come and manage the entire posture or understand and what exactly do you want to do, right, with that person? It's a very time consuming, I would say, because it's two things. One, the person who's going to join has to kind of make a career choice. At the same time, the organization which is going to hire him, right, also have to keep in mind that they have to give enough work for that person. At the same time, give them enough opportunity to grow, right? So it's a two-way process. At the same time, they do, someone who is coming in or organization has to very much validate that, hey, do we need 3 years of experience? But what what should I hire? Should I hire just a vendor? I mean, someone who's really good at McAfee. Should I hire that person or someone who understands the technological area, right? So that's why, and this it's a very valid question, not just from a junior person, right? But it's also all up to the way to the senior architects or someone who's doing chief risk officers, right? So it applies to everybody, every position, right? That what value the organization expects this position to bring in, right? And it has to be very clear. And unfortunately, and very frankly, a lot of JDs are copy paste today, right? So I don't really believe in JDs because someone writes a JD and the job role that you would play would be entirely different or may not be even linked to that JD. The first thing is that that's what a lot of the big companies do, is that they would not they do have a JD, but it is not exactly the same thing. But I would suggest that some of the small medium businesses understand what exactly they are looking for as a short term, and then what they would look at from a long term perspective. So that would help the person whom they are talking to, to understand that person's goals in their career, and how can that person help your organization from your goals perspective, so that there's a mutual understanding that, okay, if I come and change the job, there is a long-term perspective and there is a significant impact that person is going to create when he comes on board in that organization from a short-term, long-term perspective as well.
Okay. So when you say right, businesses should know what they want to do, right? So that means, like, let's say, for example, even if a company is not digitally very mature, but at least having a website, only a website, so they should be very clear about what kind of data that they are taking from the online asset, and are they making sure to protect this data at least, right? And for doing that, like, what kind of person needs to be onboarded? That's why I said specifically about the mid-sized companies or small companies, right? So these are the lines that you're saying. So during this explanation, right, you also spoke about chief security officers. So how different this role is from actually cybersecurity professional, or is it the same? Someone who is the first guy and will be taking the entire security aspects into the picture?
Yeah, the chief security officer role is pretty much the role which kind of handles the entire security posture of the organization. I mean, he's a single point of contact for the C-level executives or the board members. Anything happens security-wise in the organization, right? It can be identity and access management, data privacy controls, governance, risk and compliance, infrastructure security, cloud security. It can be your application security, right? All these aspects that come into end-to-end would be part of the chief security officer's portfolio. It's a very large role, and even if you look at small, maybe mid-sized companies, they would hire a chief security officer just to make sure that everything falls under one bucket, and give that person the freedom or the level of rights to operate in a way that, hey, you're covering all our business risks, right? Where either you deploy a application security or data security, doesn't matter, but you're able to be accountable for anything that happens within the security framework. And after that, it's not very easy, or the answer to the earlier question, right? Which person should I hire? Then you just go and outsource it from a vendor and take that person's advice, right? So you outsource certain pieces, saying that, hey, you do all my application security, and so that there is accountability, right? And it's also easy to replace, right? If this vendor doesn't do well, I can go and replace with other vendor, and there's a choice that I can make, right? There are certain things I can push an employee versus a vendor, right? So it's all the decision of the chief security officer. So he plays a very important role because he would be the end-to-end accountability perspective, anything that happens security-wise within the organization.
Yeah, so there are many various lines: application security, cloud security, mobile security, network security. Yeah. So one last question, and we'll then wind up. And the question is, uh, how do you see the people hiring ethical hackers as a security guy? Or in your experience so far working in the enterprises like Deloitte, uh, PwC, or Happiest Minds, ever you seen that you saw a benefit, or a company ever hired any kind of ethical hacker for one of the use cases to solve?
Yeah, so I think a lot of services companies rarely do that, right? Because I've not seen a lot of services companies do that.
They will
But
be
yeah,
those unique guys.
yeah. I've seen a lot of government agencies
Okay.
or certain product companies, right, who are typically in the business of testing, validating critical applications, hiring some of these top hackers, right? Because they would come from a mindset of kind of in a different approach.
breaching
Yeah,
breaching deliberately to solve whether it's a problem or not.
yeah. So, but from a services sector perspective, very rarely, right? But yeah, products, governments would really love those guys. Yeah.
Okay. So this, with this, we'll try to wind up. But if anybody is having any question, Satyapal, if you have any questions, you can type in, or just I'll try to unmute you.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you're very much audible. I have made you audible.
Yeah, so I have just one. I joined a bit late. I just wanted to differentiate between information security and cybersecurity. Is cybersecurity is a part of information security? And the second question is, how secure is a hosted model of cloud hosted model versus on premises cloud? I mean, which is better to go for as an organization? Like considering the fact that I manage one of the projects which is very secure and very sensitive government account, where we have a lot of apprehensions regarding shifting over on a private cloud or rather a public cloud.
Okay.
Is my question clear?
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah. Good, Satyapal. I think.
So
good questions. I think
for others, right? Sorry, for third question, I think I'll try to rephrase. And Satyapal, just correct me, right, if in case I'm wrong. So your third question was about that how security plays a role if in case somebody's application or the asset is hosted on cloud, or somebody who is having their in-premise server, right?
That's right.
That's what the question you had.
Yeah, that is a question. Yeah.
Okay, so to the first question, information security, is it different from cyber? It's not, right? It's the same. It's a part of cyber, I would say, right? Because if you look at the market for the last 5 years, everything is rolled out under cybersecurity, right? But why we call information is because earlier it was more of information security. It was called, and then everything came under cyber in the last 4 or 5 years, or even beyond that, because there is data and information, right? And both are different. Because data can be just data lying there, but I can, if I can combine 2-3 data, it becomes information for me, right? And may not be it's a relevant information for you, but for me it is very relevant, right? So everything is under cyber. Now, the question in terms of why should I kind of choose between my public cloud or host it on my own on-prem cloud? Uh, I would say it actually depends on uh, how. I mean, see, obviously from a security perspective, it's your control, right? If you have it in your premise, you have more control. But the reason I said it depends is because what do you want to achieve out of it, right? So let's say, do you want to have the administrative, uh, overheads in terms of someone giving testing, servers for your developers? So it's better to go for the cloud model because it's pay and use, right? Or pay per use. So do you want to give that in the on-prem? It's not a good idea because you're keeping it server, you're paying, AMC and etc. But if you're using something very sensitive,
Yeah.
it depends on, it's better to host it on your prem. But yeah, if you have advocate controls, you have you make sure that all the controls and your side of privacy and security postures are made in line, then I think it's okay to go on the cloud, right? But you've got to ensure that foolproof security is in place. Someone accessing that data. But if you're hosting someone for public use, like on a web, uh, but you've got to ensure that how you're securing on the public. Uh, but obviously, it's out of your hands sometimes. But obviously, it's more secure if you host it on your public cloud, right? Yeah. So I hope you answered your question.
Yeah, the concern is, if the data is very sensitive and you have personal identified information and things which are very sensitive in nature, you generally tend to be a little conservative in terms of putting that on the public cloud. So that is the reason why I asked this question. So this in case you have a robust security mechanism in place.
I think maybe because of the low bandwidth.
Yeah.
So we'll wait for some time before. Yeah, Satyapal, you can continue. Yeah. Your voice is not audible. Okay, let me check. Sorry. Now it should be fine.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. So that was the reason, we typically you will find that even today in corporates, it is fine to go in for a hosted model. But more and more of the government accounts, they are very sensitive on this aspect. So how do you build that confidence, and what are the plus points of a hosted model over a on-premise model, or on advantages is what I wanted to know.
Yeah. So if you look at sensitivity of the PII, for example, those data, right? It gives you obviously a lot of control and advantage if you keep it within your premises, right, rather than putting on the cloud. And the reason being is obviously you can control who has access to it. You can obviously double encrypt it 2 times, 3 times, right? Encrypt those keys as well,
that's right.
right? Thus typical controls you would have. Now, if you look at what advantages that the cloud gives, obviously you don't need to manage the entire infrastructure. You don't need to invest in the hardware,
That's
AMC, those kind of things.
That's right.
But as I said, if you're looking at some testing, something that you want to host it, you don't need to manage from a administrative perspective. You can put it on the cloud. But my sincere advice is that if you really don't know how to manage your cloud, it is going to be costing you more than what you're actually doing on the prem, right? So there is a tendency or a wrong perception that if I just put it on the cloud, it's going to, cost me less, right? It's not
Okay.
true, because what I've seen, at least in my experience, is that you've got to have a proper management system in place, or hire a guy who knows how to manage the cloud effectively, right? Only then it's going to give you fruitful results on a
Okay.
long term. Otherwise, you're going to burn more money.
Okay. Like a large organization wherein you have to get a security system in place, security team in place, then how do you go about it? I think you start with the security policy or a policy first, then going downwards on what are the various tools and technologies that to be implemented. How do we go about?
Correct. Any large organization, typically, the first thing that you got to have is a policy, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
that's okay.
Correct. The policy would help you to understand, hey, how should I operate? But it will not necessarily say that what technology should I adopt, but it would obviously give you a definition or a framework saying that, this is what I need to do to protect my business, my stakeholders, my employees, and my customers, correct?
Right.
And then that would also give you a kind of a starting point saying that, which you can demonstrate, saying that I'm being compliant as per my policy, right? But the next step is to drill it down from an procedure perspective and then architecturally perspective, right? So
Okay.
your architecture have to be in line with your policy, but at the same time, it has to be flexible to adopt any changes that might come because of either your customers or changing dynamics within the market or with your vendors, right? However,
Okay.
it has to be in line with your policy. At the same time, do a revision if required on the policy, or update your policy going forward. Now, once the architecture is done, then you can say what technologies should I adopt. Maybe let's say, for example, if I want to put a web filtering solution, then I need a web filtering solution. Uh, but you can say which are the vendors that provide me web filtering solution, right?
Okay.
And then multiple vendors would come in place. Either you do an RFP, or you kind of evaluate multiple vendors, or you take a service provider, right, who can have an expertise on that vendor. So there are 2-3 vendors, for example, right?
Yeah.
You choose 2-3 one of the vendors depending on their feature list. Obviously, one of the cost factors is one of them. Excuse me. Do they fit into
Yeah.
your requirements, right? And
Okay.
does a product have a long-term plan for adopting the your service or your business understanding, right? So
Okay.
it is in conjunction with that, because you might end up uh, you know taking the similar products from multiple vendors, right?
Yeah.
But it's a cautious call that you have to do, because if based on your architecture you want to you want to bring in 2-3 vendors, you got to understand how do you choose between any one of them, right?
Okay. Okay.
So it's a cautious call that you have to do and
Okay.
take some advisory. Yeah.
Yes, Mahendra is actually right now doing independent consulting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to
So
pinpoint.
yeah, I keep the same question. I think a lot of customers do ask me, how do I build my policies, re-architect my whole thing? Is this product right at the right time or the right fit? So yeah, it's a
Yeah, and just one point, and one of the other challenges I have faced, I'm not having to do with the security domain, is that the product obsolescence is it's slightly on the higher side compared to even you can say the IT area. especially with regard to the tools and antiviruses and all those. So that's a big challenge. Unless you have a vendor or a technology with a clear roadmap, then it becomes really difficult for you to continue with a particular product or technology.
Correct. So very true. I mean, because if you look at the security domain today, there's so many vendors, so many
Yes.
products. For example, if you look at Israel itself, has surge of companies that have come up, startups who are doing good things, very good things, but there are 20-member team or 15-member team, and they are doing fantastic things in all the domains of cyber. But again, if I adopt, is the support good enough? Do I get the product revisions or enhancements? Would I be an experiment customer, or would I get the right level of expertise from them? These are multiple questions that come up. So what they're doing is they would tie up with a larger vendor, like maybe Cisco or HP, right? Companies like that, and then piggyback those technologies between them, right? So, like for example, Microsoft looks at a lot of these technology companies. So from selecting your products, I think it depends on whether you want to do a POC or see how they're performing and understanding your environment, or do you want to get into a long-term relationship with them to see how they're maturing their products and
right.
basically how are they solving your problems, right?
That's right.
So that's what you got to look at. So it's a combination of all these things that you got to evaluate and judge and take a cautious call, right?
Okay.
Okay. So what I get this
Okay.
right, it's a
Thank
very
you.
delicate topic and definitely very thoughtful. I mean, it has to be a very thoughtful approach while strategizing any kind of cybersecurity initiatives. What you're saying.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much once again, Mahendra. Thank you so much for being the guest of this show, and Satyapal for being a wonderful participant, and others also. Once again, thanks. And so for the Redefine talks, right? Since we do this session every day at 7 p.m. and couple of last 2-3 sessions have got cancelled because of last minute urgencies by the guests, so it has not happened. But we'll meet once again tomorrow with another guest, and I'll be soon publishing. In the meantime, those who want to have another set of question or any other specific question which you all want Mahendra to answer, right? Just feel free to reach out to me or reach out to Mahendra on LinkedIn. You will type in his name, Mahendra Kumar Patukuri, his full name, and I think you will get his LinkedIn profile. Thank you so much. Good evening. Good night once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Satyapal.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.